What's up, Bitcoiners? Morning, Justin. Sun's up. We're good. We're good. Bitcoin totally running. We don't have another care in the world except for all the other stupid stuff that's going on, which we're going to talk about. Moscow time, Moscow time, Moscow time. I'm thinking about making Moscow time like a clip that we do on Bitcoin Magazine. We're just experimenting it. We might, when you have Christmas season, a little harder to create content. We're still going to be making the morning show here. We still haven't quite put some of the pieces into place for thumbnails and editing. But what I'm thinking is we start pulling out a section of this show to turn into Moscow time. So whenever I do this opening and I find a good story, might not be every day because there's enough content in Clown World that's hilarious, of course, but just a way to create some content that I think is interesting, because I think contrast between Clown World and Bitcoin is one of the best ways to discuss Bitcoin, really, right? Using the contrast between how stupid everything actually is and how wonderful we're going to make things with Bitcoin, and how wonderful we're already making things with Bitcoin. So we are indeed working on a little bit of curtains, I guess, if you will, right? So a way to intro the show, or intro the segment, the Moscow time segment. So there might be a little jingle, Moscow time, Moscow time, Moscow time. And there'll be at the end a little, probably a code for Bitcoin 2023, something like that. So we're putting that together. We might experiment with it over the holidays, as I said, where I would take the video, edit it, and put the curtains, so that beginning title sequence I just mentioned, and the end. We'll see if we don't do it now. It'll be after the break, but we're still going to keep practicing Moscow time. I've got plenty of Moscow time stuff today, for sure. I've got this one, which is hilarious. This is from Fortune. So they're talking, we're doing a COVID thing today a bit, guys. I'll warn you up front, just because Fauci's in the news. I don't normally love to talk about Fauci and COVID and the vaccines and masks. I think it's just some of the most boring stuff in the world. But there's a few things today that we're going to talk about, which I think are funny and important and give insight. So we are going to talk about that stuff today. And this is, one of the best Moscow time lead-ins into that I could find. So this is in Fortune. And what they said yesterday is that, this is a headline: people who skipped their COVID vaccine are at higher risk of traffic accidents, according to a new study. Oh, goodness. And then right away, they said the findings could justify changes to driver insurance policies. And so I guess the meaning here is that we're going to have to tell the insurance companies our vaccine status. I got a question. Now that we're starting to get more information on excess deaths, it's still murky. Right? I think a weird situation, that's why I don't love talking about the COVID thing, because you're either stuck with people who deny that the first 2 weeks of COVID were dangerous, or that we shouldn't have bothered, that the whole thing was a scam. I continue to believe that COVID was a real thing. There was a risk, particularly at the beginning. We didn't understand the risk, therefore not doing anything was probably the best, because it could have been civilizational, it could have been, right? I think information came out pretty quickly that it wasn't that. I was in New York City for the whole thing. Here, my COVID story is crazy. Because I was in New York City in January 2020, I already got COVID. And I knew it was COVID because we were talking at the time a lot with Balaji Srinivasan. Balaji Srinivasan, if you didn't know, usually helps CoinDesk with consensus. And he wasn't technically involved with us that year because he was with Coinbase and I think had a job. But he did warn us continuously in direct messages and everything from about December, whatever, 2019. So, and if you didn't know, Balaji has been regarded as one of the first people to ring the warning bell on COVID. And he was, direct messaging us, and we were already bringing it up inside of our consensus event planning by early January. And we could recognize some of the symptoms. That's how I know I had it at the time. It was already an issue in New York City in January 2020, if you didn't know that. In January 2020, you could not take the subway sick without someone saying something. So when I had COVID in January 2020, I stayed home. It was already at that point. Like if you went on to the subway in January 2020, this was around the time where everyone was saying if you didn't go to Chinatown in New York City in Lunar New Year, you were a racist, right? Because that's when the whole thing China virus was around. And so there's all those people, if you remember, you can see it on social media, all kinds of people saying it's racist it's racist to not go to Chinatown right now. And it was a whole big thing, right? So people were going on about that at the time. In my case, I already had it. I went to Barcelona to scope out what happened to a big event that was dealing with COVID and limiting its footprint, and that's Mobile World Congress, one of the biggest conferences in the world. I just went to see what was up, and I was there for case number 1 in Barcelona. I might be patient 0, by the way. I'm a little worried. Sometimes I think I'm patient 0. So I was in Barcelona for case number 1. Then I could see the city shutting down. It was happening all around me. I could see the fear creep in. The minute the first case was discussed and made public, grocery stores started closing, people started hiding. It was a really eerie feeling. And so I split immediately to Paris just in time for that city to start getting shut down. And then I said, okay, I got to get out of here. So I flew back to New York just in time for that city to start shutting down. So it was, yeah, I'm a total super spreader. Like I am patient 0 for sure. Not only that, the first cases of COVID in New York City were traced to my office building. And well, in particular, the train that would go from, what was the place where they closed down? They closed up a place up along the Hudson River towards Connecticut. I'm trying to remember what it was called. There's a town like Rye. It's not Rye, but it's the town next to Rye. And they traced the original New York City strain to the commute between my building in front of Rockefeller Center and that town. And that town ended up being closed off first. If you guys remember, there was a little town north of New York City closed down. That's where the CEO of CoinDesk even lived. So he was part of that. He had just been telling me I wasn't allowed back in the office when I got there. Here's an even funnier story. The day I got back, the fake news called me to do an interview about COVID and the market crash. So I said, yeah, sure. But I said, I warned you, I just got off of an airplane yesterday from France, and technically we didn't have all these protocols for quarantine yet. And I said, you should be aware. It's not New Rochelle. It's near New Rochelle, LV99 Slacker. It's near New Rochelle. It's still, I can't remember the name of the town. Anyway, it's that whole area, right? It's not a big area. So, so I told Fox, because it was if you remember those days when the market just went to shit, they wanted to know about the Bitcoin angle. So I went on to Liz Clayman's Fox Business show. They sent me the limo. I warned them. I said, look, I'm technically exposed and you might have to worry. And, I just got to tell you before I go in there. And they didn't know what I was talking about. They were like, but what do you mean? What are you talking about? And I said, well, there's like quarantine things now, right? I don't know if you can do this. So when I got there, they still didn't know how to handle it. And I said, I warned them again. I said, look, everyone's going to be into these like rules about who can be around who and all that. So I don't know, but I just got off an airplane from a place that is quarantined and all this stuff. So they put me onto a sound stage at the last minute so that I didn't go onto the same stage as the host. But otherwise, I would have done a live interview. And they still sent the limo and the car and all that stuff. And I told that guy, I said, all this stuff, right? So definitely there's a chance that I am patient 0. I've mentioned it to a lot of people. But all this to say, I went through the New York City COVID experience, which was max stress. And I was sort of done with listening to anyone else manage my own risk about May of that year. So if you remember, the thing happened in March. I did the 2 weeks, and then it was April. And then in April, I was going around pretty much as normal as most people in Brooklyn and New York started to. But then all the crazy stuff happened after that. So there was a brief period where it was good, and then all that stuff happened. So all that to say, manage your own risk, and just 2 weeks to flatten the curve. So, but that's the weird thing. So you're caught between, and look, here's the truth. I saw the body bags. People died, right? My neighbor died. One of my other neighbors lost both their parents. It was generally these buildings with 20 apartments in them where you'd see the body bags come out, and it was happening. There's no denying there was something that came. So, but the problem is whenever you're in this COVID debate, the lines do not match up. The lines of risk and risk tolerance and risk management don't actually line up exactly with the political lines. That's what makes the subject so difficult for people and so confusing, because it doesn't port over directly into the political lines we're used to, or any of those things. So it's a little bit like there's many people that are sort of homeless, if you will, around the COVID debate, because the tribes are each of them with logical errors and that kind of stuff. But we're going to get into all of that because there's more meaning to it than just COVID. Yeah, I'm not here to, I don't know shit about COVID, by the way. I'm not your reference for vaccines. I'm not your reference for masks. I don't care. So I don't read any of it, right? All COVID did for me was understand the importance of personal risk management, personal health. It definitely proved the point that no one is out there promoting personal health. Only Bukele in the world, as I understand, is the sole and unique world leader to promote healthy living, exercise, and all that amongst his population as a COVID mitigation tactic. Everyone else said, go be alone, take the medicine, take the jab, don't ask questions. That's the part that I find interesting, and that's why it does get so confusing, right? That's why it does get so confusing. So before we get into the COVID stuff, I just want to remind or direct everyone to the increased abilities of the ChatGPT system. Someone yesterday tried to program a Seinfeld joke, and it's getting close to getting humor, right? Remember, people will say, oh, AI will never be a real artist, and they can't do these things, and they don't know what it's like to be a human, and they won't get humor, right? Hasn't quite figured it out, but they have and even the audio is Jerry Seinfeld with the laugh track and everything, doing a stand-up skit. And you can get this from Machiavelli's Underbelly. He's always doing really interesting AI stuff. So he has Seinfeld wondering what it would be like to meet and go on a date with Elon Musk. And he's like, yeah, I would go on a date with him. He goes, but I wouldn't know what to say. I would always be like, this would be a better restaurant than we would get on Mars. What would I wear on Mars? It's the same joke, but it's great, right? So I recommend listening to it. One other piece of really bad news, if anyone out there is worried about crypto still, right? If there's any Bitcoiners watching the show that still has any interest in the crypto thing, Jim Cramer has said this morning, unfortunately, or last night, that CZ looks like a good guy and he's bullish. So I think the count is on now for Binance. I'm afraid the inverse Cramer has been invocated here, and we got some trouble. If Paul Krugman comes out and writes an article, it's fucked. We're done. We're done. Poor CZ. Poor CZ. So there you go. So the thing about this article, or this piece that I mentioned earlier about the traffic accidents and COVID, it falls into what I want to talk about today, from an article. This is from Mike Solana. If you're not following Mike Solana out there, same name as the coin, right? Same name as the coin, but has nothing to do with that crazy coin. He's just a writer, and he publishes on Substack under a title called The Pirate Wires. And today his piece is all about the fifth estate, the fifth estate. So what he says is, technology is the fifth estate, yet unlike every other fount of power, it is both disruptive of the status quo and self-replacing. From the Twitter files, proof beyond doubt that power corrupts. But how we return to the industry's true nature, right? Change. So we're going to get to that, what that is all about. So he wrote an article today describing what we call the fifth estate. Right? So the estates come from a political philosophy that dates back to medieval times, And it was the French who first, he brings up Edmund Burke here in 1787, but it goes further back than that. The French were really aligned with this, called the Ancien Régime. So it's what the French revolutionaries around the time of the US Revolution and the French Revolution described as the medieval order. And it was the three estates, right? So you had the clergy, the nobility, and the peasants and people. And this was the order of the world. And as these new nationalistic revolutions began, they began to describe a fourth estate. And the French even said, in invocating their French Revolution, which was just a few years after the American Revolution, that the third estate, so this piece here, was all we actually needed. They could get rid of the first and second estate. But as Edmund Burke started recognizing in 1787, that this discussion about three estates, and which was really the whole conversation around the French Revolution, which of course the British were watching closely because they had just gone through the American version of it and had a pretty good bird's eye view of what was going on and could feel the pressure in their own country. And here's a thing you don't know about monarchists if you're American and not aware of what the British think of their own crown. There's a very big distinction. They get a lot of pride that they didn't have to kill their king in order to get to this, right? They'll still say, but the French, they had to get rude and crass, and they had to kill their king in order to have a discussion. So the British continue to think that because they were able to manage and change the system without killing a king, that they were on a better footing and managed the change better. So here's what the British said about what was going on there. This is the Edmund Burke quote from the Mike Solana article. "Three estates in Parliament, but in the reporters' gallery yonder, there sits a fourth estate, more important than they all." So talking here about once we moved into this nation organization, I don't know if you can see it that well because of the little thing there. I'll just give you a little bit of an idea of what's going on there. So, so you've got here, the beginning of nations. I put France and America. And here's what they described as the fourth estate, more powerful than them all. So it reordered the world, right? So when you go from the medieval time to the early nation state time, you can see what the reordering looked like. It was an addition of media, in this case, when we talk about the separation of church and state from the invention of the printing press, which had happened 250 years earlier than this event. It took 250 years for this new order to form from there. Pamphleteering, political organizations through new media, basically technology created this new apparatus. Before it was the church, they were the only literate body, they were the public meeting place, they were the place where information was disseminated. So these two worked hand in glove in order to control the population and keep some form of culture and consistency going. When technology came, it took, like I said, 250 years for the apparatus to grow, to reorder things, right? To reorder things. And this goes on after the French Revolution for years. It continues on until we get to really what we call the modern era, which in this case happens around the time of World War I and World War II. And Mike Solana describes in his piece, what happened in history, how that changed. But then he gets to the Twitter files. And so right away he says, look, the Twitter files, who cares about the details? And I think, that's how we've covered it on the show. The details of the Twitter files continue to be not exactly the most interesting part of the story. The most interesting part of the story is the reaction, how the media is handling it, right? So again, we predicted on day one, the way they would handle it was ignore it. They would treat it as if, oh, everyone knew that already. Here's one of the quotes that Mike Solana uses for that, right? Let me find it here. Let me see where it is. I didn't put my notes in there very well. Anyway, I should have. It's a long text, and I didn't really put little marks on it. In any event, so the way he describes the technological power that rose after, and this is what the Twitter files end up really showing. Right? They fill in the blanks about who is in control of the country, essentially. And the way he describes it is the fifth estate is, I'll show you, here it is. What he says is this relationship metastasized into something, well, I'll even read it earlier. Throughout the 20th century, thousands of media outlets gradually consolidated, and by the dawn of our internet era, only a few giants remained. These giants largely shared a single perspective, and in a rough agreement with the ruling class, the fourth estate naturally came to serve rather than critique power, right? So what he's saying here is media here, the fourth estate, ended up not being a criticism on these two entities. It became one group. It ended up supporting them and making them stronger. And this relationship metastasized into something very close to authoritarianism during the COVID-19 pandemic, when a single state narrative was written by the press and ruthlessly enforced by a fifth and final font of power in the newly dominant tech industry. And the fifth and final font of power ends up becoming not just communication and tech, but the way the national security apparatus manipulated both of those. So here's my SPY icon that I'm using today. So that SPY icon stands for the coordination of tech, social media, and the communications power which existed before. Now, you can even hear, there was an interview that I heard recently about a congressman. This was making the rounds yesterday. I can't remember the congressman's name, but this is a congressman who sits on the House Intel Committee, saying that and this was a conversation they had with the guy on Fox, Tucker Carlson, said to him, don't text me, right? And Tucker, don't text you. What do you mean, right? He goes, well, all the security agencies are tapping. They all know what goes back and forth in my text, so don't bother with that. And Tucker said, but you're in charge of this group. What are you talking about? Like you're the oversight. You sit as a congressman on the oversight committee for the national security apparatus. And he goes, that's not how it works, right? So the person who's overseeing them actually has no control and is subject to their authority, whims, power. And what you end up seeing is a situation where, and this is where you end up getting into the trouble that we're in, right? You end up getting these guys entering the conversation, manipulating the different estates, the third and fourth estate, creating this fifth estate with technology. And the effect of it is you end up getting a type of narrative poisoning. That's what I call it. Like, remember when I talked about Hitler poisoning the other day, that you can't actually have a conversation because everything becomes, oh, you're Hitler, it's Nazi stuff, that's Hitler, that's Nazi stuff. And because it's such a toxic and irrefutable, right? Irrefutable. There's no doubt that Nazism as a standard for evil is appropriate, right? I don't think there's any doubting that. However, if you make the extreme example the consistent standard for any time you disagree with someone, you are manipulating and probably using too much force in the argument and create a situation where the words almost have no meaning anymore, which is the important reason, I think, that we have Ye West on that campaign to almost denude the word of effectiveness, right? Because in my worldview, he continued to lay a trap, which was to get him called that. I mean, he asked you to call him that. He even said he was that, so that there would be no confusion, so that it wouldn't even be difficult to call him what he said to call him, a Nazi. He said it. But then if you step back, you start to realize what kind of spectacle you're looking at, right? You've got a black man in a mask talking about how he's a Nazi, and then go one step further, we realize that the word has already lost meaning. And unfortunately, right, you would want that to be used as a warning to evil, as it was for generations, right? An extreme only brought up in an extreme case where someone had really pushed it to a point where we were in such danger that you had to have that comparison. But it's become a sign of unseriousness when someone says, oh, that's Hitler or that's Nazi. Unfortunately, we're in a world now where that person has just gone with the laziest possible contrast, and the contrast itself, to some anyway, no longer has any effect. To a large group of people, of course, it remains an effective criticism, because who wants to be associated with those people, obviously, right? Who ever wanted to be associated with those people? We all try to get distance from those people because they're so bad, which is why it works, right? Which is why the accusation is so useful for some. On the other hand, it has been weakened because people don't care anymore. It's been used and overused. It's been used for nearly 20 years to describe anyone who disagrees with a liberal orthodox. Now, we can see how this narrative poisoning is taking over. Glenn Greenwald, I keep telling you his show is debuting or debuted last night, and it keeps being a different situation where it's out, but it's not out for everyone, and it's limited and whatever. So I think the show has started now, and everyone can watch it on Rumble. But here he's talking about Taylor Lorenz. So Taylor Lorenz, who is a Washington Post journalist. Some people say the fakest journalist in the world. Right? Some people say that. I would probably be one of those people who thinks this is more entertainment at this point, right? That she's hired in order to create enragement, engagement, and say the craziest shit. It's a bit of a Trump play, if you will, right? To put someone a little bit cartoony and clownish out into the market in order to just get people angry and riled up because it gets so many clicks. Because she's regularly the lightning rod for conservative and right-wing anger and disdain. Rightfully so. She has a problem understanding context sometimes and says stuff that triggers people because it's so hypocritical, much the same way Trump did. So here's what she says about Bari Weiss, who used to be on her team in some ways. So she says, notable what gets framed as buzzy media startup, because I guess this is from Axios. Bari Weiss reveals business plans for a buzzy new journalistic startup. Notable what gets framed as buzzy media startup. If you start off rich, have a rich spouse, rich friends, don't follow any journalistic ethical rules. So this is a person whose journalistic ethics have been criticized regularly, and focus your content solely on serving the interests of extremely powerful, rich people, you can go far. So Glenn Greenwald comes in and says, this person works for the planet's second richest man and went to a Swiss boarding school, talking about Taylor Lorenz, yet constantly talks as if she's a low-paid hourly worker just getting by as a cook or at a homeless shelter. She also has more corrections appended to articles than most people have socks, right? So talking about the journalistic ethical rules, she's quoted people without them ever giving a quote before. She's done all this kind of stuff, right? So what they're talking about is the ability for people like this to manipulate this infrastructure, really to poison people's minds. And that's what I see when I look at the Twitter folks who help suppress Trump. That's what I see when I see the Twitter folks who helped suppress COVID discussions, right? I don't see people actively interested in finding the truth or actively interested in questioning institutions because they're so used to following the lead. And in some ways, they've been misled, of course. I still think there's a certain amount of innocence there, that these are useful idiots, that these are people that just don't know. In the same way, so I put all of the Twitter people, right, all of the Twitter staff that people think should go to jail now because they did all this stuff, all the Twitter staff, all of those folks, I put them in the same bucket as the folks who went and protested on January 6th, who protested the elections. The people who protested the elections on January 6th and are now in jail thought they were doing something patriotic. Because of narrative poisoning, they thought what they were doing was great and was to protect the Republic. In the same way, when you use the Hitler comparison all the time, when you're constantly comparing things to Nazis, the people at different media outlets, the people at Twitter are basically thinking they're doing the right thing. They think they're patriots. And that can only happen when these systems have been abused to the point that they've been abused. Remember, the national security apparatus knew before Twitter even got the files on Hunter Biden that it was fake. They knew it. And they still signed the 51-person letter saying it was Russian disinformation, which led to all of the actions on the part of Twitter. So there might be some individuals within both groups that understand that this was narrative poisoning and were totally aware that they were being manipulated and still went along with it. But I'd say the majority of them, I think you have to do a case by case, or else just do a blanket trade, right? I think you can trade a prisoner swap, basically, to just understand that the people on the side of Twitter, I don't agree with any of their stuff, right? I don't agree with their COVID stuff. I don't agree with their suppression of information. I don't agree with any of it. However, they still thought their intention was do the right thing, put science out there, right? Protect people, fight to maintain the elections because these other people are stealing them, in this case, Trump's folks, right? While at the same time, the Trump folks believed they were doing the right thing. Now, the reason all of this becomes important is you see Fauci on television yesterday, right? Fauci on television and talking about how Elon Musk said prosecute Fauci, that those are his pronouns. And he comes out and says, oh, I'm just a simple guy. I'm just a simple guy trying to do the best, trying to save people's lives. I can't imagine why anyone would want to do this and all those things. Now, Fauci, right? We don't know, right? I accepted him and decided to never get angry about what he said because I never expected him to do anything right, right? When COVID started, when I described I'm in New York, I'm the super spreader, I'm patient zero, I already had enough guilt on my shoulders. I'm just kidding. But I'm sitting there and I'm saying, I'm not going to get mad at anyone during COVID. I'm not going to get mad because they're all stupid. No one knows what's going on, and I can't expect anyone to get anything right. So I'm just going to ignore this stuff. I'm going to work on Bitcoin and watch Clown World just screw up again and again and again. And I'm not going to follow any of the rules. I'm going to do what I think is best for me, and we'll see how it goes. Right? We'll see how it goes. And I gave myself permission to forge things. I didn't care, right? I just forged. You know how easy it was to cross borders, by the way, if you understood that game. If you spent 2 seconds with Photoshop and needed a COVID test, it was pretty simple, right? It was not hard. And so I just decided I would not acknowledge, respect, recognize any authority because it was already broken. And I didn't need to listen to them, basically. And that helped me see the field clearly the whole time, because I wasn't ramping up my anger each time about new mandates or whatever. Now I understand why others would. My kids aren't involved in the school system. They don't even know anything about masks. They never wore one, never had one. I fled down south just to stay out of indoor places that would force me to wear a mask. So I had discretion. Even then, it caught up to me. I mean, when I was when I was down south during the whole lockdowns in early 2021, I had to live through a fucking volcano eruption. And that finally made me stay indoors for 2 weeks because it was toxic outside. It was unreal. You could not go outside. So finally, it caught up to me no matter what. As much as I tried to get away from lockdowns and all that, in the end, it just caught me. So now you got Fauci, who's on television yesterday, talking about how he's such a good guy and there should be no prosecution because he didn't know and what's going on, and he's just trying to do this stuff. So here's the thing, right? I said I would never get angry as it was going on. But as we started to find out stuff, it's time to prosecute. It's time now to get the anger going. I just accepted Fauci the whole time as a bad cop, essentially. You had a good cop and a bad cop, and someone had to do the bad news, and it had to be someone, and there's the bad cop. But the world changed, and now we see the abuse of power, and that's what the Twitter files show so explicitly. That's why they're important, right? The Twitter files aren't important because we know that someone at Twitter did something illegal or anything like that, right? Here's what they end up proving, and this is from Mike Solana again, right? Here's where we go. Altogether, the Twitter files, an ongoing story, paint a portrait of clear and inevitable partisan bias at one of the most dominant speech platforms in history. A small handful of very left-wing executives who naturally perceived most opinion right of center as dangerous worked tirelessly to limit those opinions from view. Empowered to censor unsafe content and protected by a team of people who shared their political orientation, the executives produced in a legal and decentralized manner. That's the important thing, in a decentralized manner, a key component of our de facto state censorship apparatus. While we don't know for sure this is also happening at Google, Meta, and TikTok, I think it's safe to look that this is industry-wide affliction. And that's where it is, right? He says the fifth estate is a fundamentally different kind of power. It's more difficult to consolidate than media and more difficult to control than even our government divided by design. Divided by design. Its impact is also far more difficult to predict. This is because technology is above all things defined in terms of newness, which not only makes it disruptive to pre-existing power, but destructive of itself, a sort of anti-power that only guarantees change. The true failsafe, our ultimate reset, tremendously empowering of tyranny in times of stagnation. Technology is also our most powerful weapon against tyranny in times of innovation. And that's the point, right? That's what becomes important. Now that everything is sort of up for grabs, now that we see the 51 liars definitely manipulated these things, definitely conducted a form of psychological warfare, because that's World War III is psychological and economic warfare, right? That is the definition of it. It is psychological and economic warfare. Forget the military machines for a second. Tanks aren't important this time. Drones are, but that's another story. The actual battlefront of World War III is economic and psychological. Those are the two main pieces. And the war is happening inside of countries. It's not just between countries themselves. It's between countries and their people. And that's totally new. We haven't seen that since we were in this trouble years ago, right? Things have changed so much that we see exactly how technology is manipulated by the other estates of power, right? But as Mike Solana says, right, technology itself is the way to change this. And that's what makes Bitcoin so unique relative to these things. As he mentions in his article, our entire concept of technology until now has been the consumer type of technology, in that it is iPhone 11, iPhone 12, iPhone 13, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, Wii, right? Everything is about the new thing, faster, stronger, better. And because of that race, it's a type of arms race, right? It's a type of technological arms race. Controlling these different outlets became the name of the game. Getting into Google, getting into Facebook, getting into Twitter became the point of these spy agencies and the way they disseminated information, because they'd been so used to it when it was just terrestrial stations. Their decentralized infrastructure to censor before and to shape narrative and to psychologically manipulate people was a lot straighter. It was a lot easier to run, right? The whole mess we're in with healthcare now can be traced right up until COVID as being this, right? Who pays for the news that everyone watches? Go watch a 24-hour news channel and find out who pays for it, right? You don't have to even listen to any studies or this show, or you don't have to, just look at the advertisements. Count the advertisements. Who are they? It's all pharmaceutical companies. Every single one of them is a pharmaceutical company. And if you follow the money, it becomes very obvious that the things we think of as healthcare and science are really just a money-making scheme on their part, and they convince us to do it, right? The largest fines in the history of American pharmaceutical companies have come around the OxyContin cases. In the OxyContin cases, what they became responsible for, the damages they were responsible for, were creating an illness. Breakthrough pain. There's no such thing. There's no such thing. They just made up a term, paid doctors $100,000 a piece to talk about a thing which they invented, breakthrough pain. All breakthrough pain was pain that lasted long, and the long-lasting pain required a new dosage of OxyContin. Now, all of the miracle of OxyContin was that it could be engineered to not be addictive, right? So at first they thought, okay, engineer it to not be addictive, but then people realized they could crush the pills and freebase it and turn it into a needle, and that was a powerful form of opioid and was addictive. So right away they moved to make the pills non-crushable, right? They thought that would stop it. No, it didn't work. But then in the end they realized having it addictive is probably not bad. So the only way to get over the new addictive limitations in dosage and whatever was to have a higher dosage, which would apply to more pain. So they had to invent this new pain category, breakthrough pain. It's just pain that lasts long. It's totally made up. So that's what they proved in this case. And that's why the damages were so large. The damages, I think, are in the multiple trillions. I think Walmart alone has to pay like 8 trillion or 8 billion, sorry, not trillion, 8 billion. Various groups, 5 billion, 6 billion, 7 billion, huge fines, right? So this idea of consumer technology is really what we think of when we think of technology, as Mike Solana underlines, right? It's new. Whatever's new is the thing. And when we think of what's new, right, that's where Bitcoin starts behaving so differently. That's where it starts to stop this historical trend in its tracks. Since the printing press was invented, everything that was new just usurped the entire order of what came before. And this current has been almost unstoppable, right? Whatever's new, whatever performs better, just eats the thing that came before. And the only groups that have been able to keep on top of that are the ones that are controlling the media and the ones that are controlling political institutions, particularly from the security surveillance point of view. Because the new things come, and before anyone knows about it, they co-opt it. They get it and they use it and manipulate it before anyone even knows the risks or whatever. Think about how early they were involving themselves in social media. It's been a while. It's been a while. We've seen it. We could see it happen. Right? We remember what the internet felt like before the national security apparatus showed up. It was not the same. It was not the same at all, right? We remember what it was like at that time, the type of information that you could find, how that type of information was shared and could come to you. But then suddenly everyone realized the news just became people reporting what was on Twitter, right? The mainstream news just reports on what's on Twitter. This show just reports what's on Twitter, mostly, right? We take the debates on Twitter and we pull them out and turn them into something cohesive around a Bitcoin frame, right? That's what we do here. We frame everything in terms of Bitcoin and the psychological engine that pushes Bitcoin forward and that will help shape the future. But on the part of other tech, right, we look at how it probably can't create a future. It doesn't have that thrust anymore. It doesn't have that capacity. So when we look at the thrust of technology, faster, newer, stronger, Bitcoin resists that trend. That's what makes it so different. Bitcoin ends up being because it isn't consumer technology, right? We confuse consumer technology with technology. They're not the same thing. Consumer technology is a type of technology. It's a type of technology. But Bitcoin has resisted every upgrade since it was invented, right? That's why it's so easy to sell upgrades to Bitcoin in shitcoins and other things, because mentally, human minds are already persuaded to understand that faster, better, stronger is a good idea in technology. And with Bitcoin, it didn't work that way, right? It didn't work that way. It gives people a chance to stop, pause, gather what's around them, account for what's around them. They can start seeing the movements of people. And in the end, the contrast of Bitcoin not being consumer technology, being technology that actually helps your psychological state. It helps you see the world around you. Not the same. It's not a new factor that you have to adjust to. Right? It's not like when they invented, a new search algorithm or a new video game that suddenly it would become so addictive that people use it. We talked yesterday about how the military has been using its PsyOps industry to develop video games for years. For years, they've been developing first-person shooter games and all that kind of stuff because it was so powerful in shaping folks without them understanding what was happening. Because Bitcoin allows us to stop for a second, because Bitcoin ain't going to change. It's not going to change, right? A little bit here and there, but these are just small engineering questions. They're not about overhauling the system and time, right? Bitcoin is Bitcoin. It's not going to be something else. And it can be used in different ways, but the actual entity that it is, the organism that it is, will remain in shape and form and function similar in the future to what it is now. And the great thing about that is that unlike the printing press, which started a wave of new technology, one on top of the other, faster, stronger, higher, and we got caught up in that whole thrust, Bitcoin is putting the brakes on it, right? I'm not saying we're going to innovate with technology otherwise. There's all kinds of innovations in the consumer tech field that are left undiscovered and that we will get to. But it doesn't seem like we're getting to those now. That's where that innovator's dilemma question comes in. The innovator's dilemma, the Christensen book out of Harvard, basically says that people who have all the power have no reason to innovate, and therefore, you're not going to get an oil company who invents the best electric battery in the world, right? There's no reason for them to do that. One of the reasons why I always liked the finance side of the ICO stuff. Don't make it sound like I like ICOs. I don't like what happened. I don't like the shit coins. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the ability to can a contract to raise money for an idea that could change the energy paradigm is a good thing, right? So not saying ICOs are the way to go or anything like that, but the idea that you can a contract or can a system that allows you to raise money to an incumbent and entrenched entity is a good thing, right? We need that. We need that. So there's still plenty, and I would put the whole Ethereum thing and all the Solana and all the things that came after. That's just consumer tech, right? That's just consumer tech. That's why they get caught up in all that stuff, right? They just get caught up in it because it is consumer tech. And to the extent that people like consumer tech, okay, fine, right? But it's not what we're doing here. What we're doing here is helping us psychologically adapt to the world around us, and having some platform that only a handful of engineers can understand and only a handful of traders can understand is not where we want to go, right? The Ethereum worldview is the smarter people will just get smarter, and they'll continue to tell you what to do with your life, right? That's what they're betting on. They're saying that it's not so much that we have ultra sophisticated traders with Series 7 licenses and 130 IQs or 120 IQs, or all that stuff, all the stuff that goes into participating on Wall Street. They're saying we need one more skill and talent in their stack, which is they've also got to be computer science engineers and be able to run these ridiculous nodes and do all that stuff, right? These however many gigabytes are now in the Ethereum blockchain. Who even knows, right? Who even knows how bloated that thing has become? I lost track years ago. So there's all those folks out there and focused on that consumer tech piece. And when I hear Mike Solana say that technology is the key, he's correct. He's correct. However, we have created a technology that takes out the arms race for technology. Because if it's an arms race, it's going to be hard to beat these guys, right? They have resources, they have all that stuff. They can just co-opt any new system that's come up. And that's what we've seen in the past 50 years. Every new system that's been every new system that's been created gets co-opted pretty quickly. How long did it take them to co-opt Facebook? How long did it take them to co-opt Twitter? How long did it take them to co-opt Google? Not long. Netflix, whatever. All of this stuff, co-opted. That's where the uniparty works together, right? To co-opt these institutions, bring in a linear way of thinking, have the official narrative for media, for healthcare, for all that stuff be disseminated through those, because they can stay one step ahead. What a blessing it's been. What a blessing it's been that people have criticized Bitcoin for being slow and old tech, right? That's how we've been able to gather strength. The idea that people continue to underestimate what's going on here, that they see it as an old, all the other ones are better, all that stuff. Now, the people who lose money in crypto find out quickly that they're not, consumer tech frame was a bad idea, and you're not going to make money just because you found the thing that someone told you was faster and stronger, right? Eventually, you start to understand that Bitcoin's success comes from its ability to survive without changing too much. That's where it comes from. And once people start to understand that, then the world starts to become a little clearer. And you end up having the time to stop and think about what we're seeing with the Twitter files, right? The Twitter files getting all of these conservatives riled up and angry, get the Twitter people in jail. Again, I say trade them. Think of them as victims. The real enemy is the one who rolled them, the Faucis, right? That's who rolled them. And they thought they were protecting people the same way the J6 people thought they were defending the Republic. It's the same thing, right? I think of them as the same. And you're not going to hear that point of view from anyone outside of Bitcoin, essentially, right? Because the Republicans want all of the Twitter people in jail, and the Democrats want all the J6 people in jail, right? But I see these people as future Bitcoiners. These are people who have been poisoned by the narrative. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have criticized the election last year. I'm not saying that at all, right? But enough people knew that J6 was a trap. Mike Cernovich warned it's a trap. All kinds of people said you're in trouble if you go there. There's dark forces at power at work, and probably not an honest situation in DC on January 6th. Stay away. You're not going to get a fair treatment, right? And I think we see that now. I think that's pretty clear. So I think of these people as the same. And I think only Bitcoiners are out there saying, like, can we just have some innocent until proven guilty stuff going on here for these folks? And what I continue to say is that I'm ready to flip the culpability. For me now, at this point, Fauci is guilty until proven innocent. He's no longer just a normal citizen, right? He's part of these entities. And I think at this point, those folks have enough explaining to do and enough convincing that they're not part of some nefarious force that it's up to them. So I say the burden is flipped. Now, as an individual, of course, I think Fauci can have the presumption of innocence, but he's still part of entities that I think have no right to be considered innocent until proven guilty. I'm prepared, fundamentally, I'm prepared now mentally to flip in general corporate responsibility and government responsibility to guilty until proven innocent. I think if we've let these people infiltrate the human environment with their moral names and because they're moral people, that's what we call them, right? I think we're ready to start treating them even differently. And I think we can have innocent or guilt until proven innocence. Let me get to a bunch of these. I missed a lot of quotes today, team. Let me see. Freedom go up. Fauci is dumb like a fox. Yeah, no one should be above the law. Yeah, no one should be above the law. Of course, above the law. No way, Joe. No way should anyone be above the law. Freedom go up technology. That's it. The key to good mental health. Stop watching the news. P-Man Van. That's it. The narrative poisoning. These guys are indeed going to create anxiety. And you can see it if you leave America and you leave Europe. If you leave America and you leave Canada, you start to see the people in the rest of the world. Well, Brazil's probably not in that case anymore, but the amount of psychological abuse and manipulation that goes on in America compared to the rest of the world is extreme. It's extreme. I've felt it, right? I've lived in South Korea. I've lived in France. I've lived in Japan. People are not this way, and they are this way because they have been manipulated, because they are part of a battlefront and they're not that aware. Yeah, and filter your YouTube and Twitter feeds. This is Bitcoin Graffiti adding to P-Man Van with Chrome extension, so you don't see the crap. Yeah, I killed my homepage on YouTube. I don't see any recommendations. It's just black. I only actively query for stuff. Awesome, Bitcoin Graffiti. You can switch off trending hashtags and other distracting stuff with a good Chrome extension. Can recommend to everyone. Save time. Don't distract yourself. Justin, Bitcoin is one of the only backward compatible pieces of tech out there. And that's the whole point of the forks, right? That a hard fork is just one that isn't backwards compatible. Soft forks, the definition of them is that they're backwards compatible. And that's a really important thing. And people underestimate just how important it is. But in this arms race that we're in to psychologically manipulate and use people in this way, the only answer is to have a place where they can catch up with the world. And Bitcoin is that place. You can actually catch up and stop for a second and see what's going on, because Bitcoin is such a contrast to everything else that it allows that, right? But Bitcoin is boomer tech. Yeah, this is how we built money back in my day. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Joe, Bitcoin is beauty, peace, the great disruptor for those in power. It sure is. Yeah. Bitcoin just feels good. Feels good, man. We love our frog, our Pepes. But that's why government changes don't seem to make any meaningful difference. The machine is GovTech media. Twitter, like Bitcoin, is now a disruptor. Yes, I think that's true, bud. I found Bitcoin when I got caught in Luna. Yeah, wow, Joe. No, bring it up, man. I think it is normal and a totally normal rite of passage to go through this stuff. And this is the psychological manipulation that we're talking about in this show. The early Bitcoiners had it a little easier. in the sense that there wasn't a lot of competition. Like, I got to ask Vitalik to his face before the network even launched what I thought was going to happen with Ethereum. I said, is anyone going to mine this thing? Because at the time it was already amazing that Bitcoin was running. Just that it was running. If you went back to 2013, 2014, that it was running, that it survived its meltdown, and that miners continue to show up was still the miracle. That still is what it didn't. There wasn't a big exchange and all that stuff. It was like, wow, it's working. That was enough for us to believe it was so different and superior to everything else and didn't need to change. We had all seen the first attempts to make it faster, stronger, and they didn't work. So when Vitalik came up with Ethereum, I asked, who's going to mine this? He was right. I didn't think anyone was going to come. I disagreed with him. I said, no one's going to show up for this stupid shit. Like, who the fuck cares, right? There's one working. Why do we need another one? And I was wrong, 100% wrong. But the ability to coalesce around Bitcoin and this feeling of faster, stronger doesn't quite do it was already clear to people because there wasn't as much distraction. There wasn't as much psychological warfare going on in the space. And what we saw after with the ICOs was the get-rich-quick mentality, the high time preference mentality, all of that entered. Now, I will always applaud Ethereum for introducing a whole new group of people to the architecture of what we're doing, in the sense that all the statists, we hadn't really connected to statists yet, people who are so interested in governance, basically left-wing people. There were the extreme cypherpunks who were more on that end, but the next round of Bitcoiners were the political people, the libertarians and the anarcho-capitalists and all those folks, and they wanted nothing to do with statism. So Bitcoin has to be for everyone. So I will always give Ethereum credit for introducing a new crowd who some of them would have come to Bitcoin. I don't know, I haven't done an inventory, but that they were successful in communicating with a group that wasn't interested or hadn't come to the table yet was good. But that's about the end of it, right? So everything after, people, I could see why they'd get caught up in this, right? There's a new, faster, stronger Luna and this and that, go get it, right? It takes probably getting burned to understand that we're not dealing with Nintendo. This is not iPhone. We're not in the world of iPhones and Nintendo here. We're into changing people's minds. That's not the same as an iPhone and a Nintendo, right? They're not the same thing. So Joe, I think I encourage everyone to talk about whatever coin they got into before, because everyone's been there. Der Gigi, big ETH head back in those days, right? Big. When I was telling Vitalik, don't do it, not don't do it, but I don't know if I think it's dumb. He was a programmable money, right? So even the staunchest, clearest minded Bitcoiners were seduced by the siren song. So it's normal and no shame at all. No shame at all. Everybody, Joe has and will have a Bitcoin story. Exactly. Joe, pardon me, I didn't see all these notes. Many of us had a first touch to the stove before learning. Yeah, pardon me. Yes. Bitcoin just works, CK says. Exactly. Yeah, it's easy to understand, and that's the whole point, right? That's why the IQ chart is one of the best. Where the super high IQs and the super low IQs love it, but the mid ones can't get it. That's the world we're living in, right? Imagine a money that forces you to take a stake in order to not be debased. Yeah, but if you stake, you can't withdraw. Yeah, it's not looking good over there. But again, my idea continues to be, we got to grow Ethereum big enough to wipe out Wall Street. Like, I don't think the scam is large enough yet. We got to get it much bigger than the FTX scam, much bigger. If Vitalik doesn't become a bigger loser than SBF, I don't want him to go to jail. And again, knowing Vitalik, this is a gentle person, right? If any way I could describe him, I don't mean that in a nice way necessarily, right? I don't mean it as like a backhanded compliment. What Jordan Peterson, for example, has said about really gentle, nice men, right? It's not really a good thing. But there is a good part to it. I don't want to make him sound like an evil person. My experience with him is he's very conscious about the people around him, and doesn't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and is absolutely a gentle person. That the non-violence, I guess, is one way to absolutely describe him. I mean, how could he be violent? He's tiny, right? So it makes sense why he's like that. And I've met his family. His dad's a great guy, and his dad hangs out in the scene in Toronto. I've met him a bunch. His dad, by the way, looks like a WWF wrestler. You wouldn't believe his dad compared to him. His dad is jacked, like big guy, so there you go. ETH worse than the dollar, yes. To learn, yeah. The Solana phone is proof that the shitcoiners are stuck in the consumer tech mentality. Absolutely, yes. The Solana phone is absolutely a sign that this is all consumer tech, and it's even a reason why, as a Bitcoiner, I supported Solana in the early days. I didn't buy any and not influencing it or any of that stuff, but I saw it as the greatest way to attack Ethereum. I'm not going to get into like Bitcoin is better arguments with ETH heads, because it doesn't make any sense to them. Just take them on their word. They say faster, stronger. Okay, I got something for you. Faster, stronger. Here, let's party. So I continue to see Solana, and whatever comes, I don't care about Solana. Whatever comes next, I would just assume that is the best attack vector on it. You can just take anything faster and stronger and package it up and ship it to the ETH heads, and it will do damage every single time. It will do damage because they're susceptible they're built off of those arguments, right? They're built off of that logic. So all you have to do is continue with the logic they're on, and they can't help it. They're going to go for it, right? So I continue to say, don't argue with them as Bitcoiners. Just say, well, what about this one? It's better than yours, right? You don't have to support it. You just have to say, well, whatever you're talking about, if you think probabilistic math is good enough for finality for transactions, all right, I got some probability for you. I got more probability for you, right? That's not the same as the finality of Bitcoin. If they're willing to go from hard finality to probabilistic math, I got a party for you, right? I got a party. So there you go. Bitcoin is truth. I found it after the Jan 6th disappointment. Yeah, and that's why it was narrative poisoning, right? And that's another reason why Trump should not be considered this time around, right? Because Trump's behavior with Jan 6 is the same as his behavior on his last day in office, when he could have pardoned Ross and he could have pardoned Ed. He could have pardoned those people. And if he was so interested in the freedom of the individual and the case and all these guys, he'd have done so. And so again, remember when Ye went over to Mar-a-Lago, it was to criticize him for this point. What have you done with the J6 people? You don't deserve to be president anymore. You could have pardoned them. You could have got them out of this trouble, and you didn't. I don't believe he really led them into trouble, but he didn't help them either, right? He didn't help them either. And in my mind, that means you're not really on our team, right? If you're not on the team of individual liberty, you're not anywhere close to our team. You're just not even close. And again, the J6 to me is identical to the Twitter thing. They're the same story. These people are victims of a system that would abuse them and not care about their individual experience in life. Bitcoin helps us catch up. It helps us take stock of the world. It helps us measure the deception. It helps us measure everything, right? That's why I continue to say the most important thing about Bitcoin is we can count it. That's all we really need to know. We can count it. And because we can count it, we can give sense to everything around us in the world. Fiat does not allow you to do that. You can't measure anything. It's all just they're rich and they're rich and they're richer and they went faster and stronger and they got richer, but where is it coming from? Right? We can't make heads or tails of it or any sense of it. Therefore, we have a world filled with anxiety, filled with misunderstanding, filled with an inability to get your bearings about you. But finally, we've slowed down the massive acceleration of technology and are allowing ourselves to take a breath. Doesn't mean we're not going to invent the most amazing stuff ever. We're entering the gold. We're this close. We're there. We're at the golden age. The things are breaking in front of our eyes. So I no longer even see it as, oh, we got to fight against it. This isn't like the rebels in Star Wars against the Empire. They're already kaput. It's done. It's over, right? It's just going to work itself out. And it's not inevitable that Bitcoin is going to win. We have work to do for sure. It is a hearts and minds battle. But I think the clock is ticking. That's where I'm coming from. Right. All right, team. Long episode today. Peace. I'll be on at noon. Bitcoin Magazine Live. We'll have news and notes. And we're going to have, is it Wednesday? Yeah, it's Wednesday. So Fed Watch is tomorrow. All right, team. Peace.